My older brother stole my other brother's fiancée 2 months before the wedding. The family shattered when they secretly married, but a year and a half later, she cheated on him with someone else and left him destroyed. I'm 22 years old, work part-time while finishing college, and I need to tell this story because basically my family completely disintegrated like 2.5 years ago, and honestly, I'm still struggling to process everything that happened. I guess I should start by explaining what we were like before, because what we had was special, or at least that's what we all thought. We were 4 siblings. Eric was 29, Owen 25, Isabel 26, and I was the baby of the family at 22. Our parents raised us with this super strong idea that family was the most important thing in the world, like blood is thicker than water and all those phrases you've probably heard 1,000 times. But for us, they weren't just words. It was like our life code. You know what I mean? My dad especially was super intense about it. He always said we could fight with each other, but at the end of the day, we had to be there for one another because we were family and that was sacred. Eric was the oldest brother and I'm not gonna lie, he was my mom's favorite, even though she never admitted it. He was that kind of charismatic person who everyone liked. You know, the one who tells jokes at family gatherings and everyone laughs. The one who always had a kind word for everyone. He worked in sales or something like that. Honestly, I never paid much attention to the details of his job, but he was doing well financially. Owen was completely different, quieter, more introspective, the typical brother who worked hard for everything he got. He was an accountant and lived in a modest but tidy apartment, completely opposite to Eric, who lived in a bigger, flashier loft. Isabel was like the voice of reason in the family, super centered and practical. She worked in human resources and was always the one who kept a cool head when the rest of us got dramatic. And I was basically everyone's confidant. I don't know why, but all my siblings always ended up telling me their stuff. Their problems, their doubts, as if I had some special wisdom, when really I was the youngest and probably the least experienced of everyone. Things started to change when Owen met Brooke. That was like 4 years ago, I think, or maybe almost 5. I'm not completely sure. He met her at a networking event for his work. Something super boring according to what he told me, but somehow they connected. Brooke was pretty, like that classic beauty but not intimidating. She worked in marketing or advertising, something creative, and had that bubbly personality that perfectly complemented how serious Owen was. At first, we were all happy for him because, honestly, Owen had never had much luck in love. He was always so focused on his career and doing things right that relationships weren't his priority. But with Brooke, it seemed different. He seemed more relaxed, happier, and we all thought he had finally found someone special. Brooke integrated into the family pretty quickly. She came to family dinners, to birthdays, spent Christmas, with us, and we all treated her as if she was already an official part of the family. My mom adored her, always asked her about her work and her plans, and my dad respected her because he saw how happy she made Owen. Eric also got along well with her, or so it seemed. He was always friendly and jokey with her like he was with everyone. Isabel and I basically considered her another sister. We'd go out together sometimes, talked about girl stuff. It was all very normal and nice. After like 2 years of being together, Owen proposed and she said yes. And we were all super excited because Owen was going to be the first of us to get married, and also because we genuinely thought Brooke was perfect for him. The engagement was beautiful. Like Owen did everything right. He took her to that restaurant they both liked. There were flowers. The ring was gorgeous, though not ostentatious, because Owen was never one of those people who needed to impress with material things. I remember when they told us at the next family dinner, my mom cried tears of happiness, and my dad hugged Owen with that strong hug that only dads know how to give. Eric was one of the first to congratulate them. He raised his glass and gave a toast about love and family and all those nice things you say when your brother is getting married. Brooke was radiant, showing everyone the ring, talking excitedly about wedding plans, and Owen had that quiet smile he had when he was genuinely happy. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. Looking back, I should have noticed that something so perfect couldn't last. They started planning the wedding, and I was helping Brooke with some things because, well, that's what sisters-in-law do, right? We'd go look at venues for the reception, look at dresses, talk about flowers and colors, and all those decisions that seem super important when you're planning a wedding. Owen was less involved in the details. Typical of him, he trusted that Brooke would make the best decisions, and he just nodded and paid for whatever was needed. The wedding was going to be in spring. They'd been engaged for like 6 or 7 months when things started getting weird, although at the time I didn't see it clearly. They were just little details that didn't fit, but that my brain didn't process as warning signs. The first time I noticed something strange was at a family dinner at my parents' house. Brooke arrived with Owen as always, but Eric was also there, and suddenly I realized that Brooke and Eric had like these inside jokes that the rest of us didn't understand. Like, Eric would say something and Brooke would laugh in a specific way, or she'd mention something and he'd respond with a reference that only the two of them got. At first I thought maybe they'd talked before dinner and had some fresh joke. I don't know. I didn't give it much importance. But then I started noticing it happened often. Too often. At another family gathering, I saw that Brooke was texting someone and laughing alone with her phone. And when I asked her what was so funny, she said, "Oh, nothing. Just a meme Eric sent me." And I thought, since when do Eric and Brooke send each other memes? Owen also started noticing it, though he didn't say anything to me at first. But I knew him well. I could see when something bothered or worried him. He had this way of getting quiet and thoughtful that was different from his normal silence. One night he called me. It must have been like 11 at night, which is late for Owen because he's super into routines and was normally already asleep by that time, and he asked if we could talk. I went to his apartment and found him sitting on his couch with a beer in his hand, which was also weird because Owen almost never drank alcohol during the week. I sat with him and he said, "Have you noticed anything weird between Brooke and Eric?" And I didn't know what to say because yes, I had noticed it, but I also didn't want to be the one putting crazy ideas in his head. So I asked him what specifically he had noticed. He told me that Brooke had been acting weird, like more distant with him, always on her phone, always with excuses for why they couldn't see each other certain days or why she'd come home late after going out with friends. He told me that once he checked her phone, something he'd never done before because he trusted her completely, and saw she had like 1,000 messages with Eric, messages that according to him seemed too friendly, too intimate to be just in-laws. But the part that impacted me most was when he told me he'd confronted Brooke about this and she'd gotten super defensive, saying that Eric was like her brother, that he was exaggerating, that jealousy didn't look good on him. And I thought, that's the classic response from someone who has something to hide, right? But I didn't tell Owen that because he looked so destroyed, so confused, that I didn't want to make it worse. I suggested that maybe he should talk to Eric directly, like brother to brother, ask him what was up with him and Brooke. But Owen told me he was afraid of what he might discover, that he preferred to believe he was imagining things rather than face the possibility that his brother and his fiancée were betraying him. And I understood. Seriously. Because who wants to believe something like that about the two people you love most? We stayed there talking until like 2 in the morning. Me trying to calm him down, him trying to convince himself that everything was fine, that it was just pre-wedding stress, that Brooke loved him and that Eric was his brother and that family was sacred. But we both knew, even though we didn't say it out loud, that something was very wrong. The following weeks were horrible. Owen tried to act normal, but I could see he was suffering. He lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, was clearly stressed but didn't want to worry my parents or Isabel. I didn't say anything either because Owen had asked me not to, that it was his problem and he was going to solve it. But then the inevitable happened, what we all feared but no one wanted to admit. One night, Brooke came to Owen's apartment and told him they needed to talk. Owen called me the next day and his voice sounded completely dead, empty, like someone had ripped the soul out of his body. He told me that Brooke had confessed everything, that she'd been having an affair with Eric for months, that it had started as something innocent, just messages and conversations, but then it became physical, that they'd been seeing each other in secret, that they'd been sleeping together while Owen worked and planned his future with her. I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't process what he was telling me. I asked him if he was sure, if maybe he'd misunderstood something, but he told me no, that Brooke had told him clearly, with details that he wasn't going to repeat to me because they were too painful. He told me that Brooke had told him she'd fallen in love with Eric, that it hadn't been her intention, but it had happened, that she was so sorry but she couldn't marry him when she was in love with his brother. And the most fucked up part, sorry for the language but there's no other way to describe it, the most absolutely devastating part was that Brooke told him that Eric felt the same way about her, that they were going to be together, that she was going to move in with Eric. Owen told me all this with this monotone voice, without emotion, like he was reporting the weather, and I just cried on the other end of the phone because I didn't know what else to do. I went to see him immediately, I left everything I was doing and drove to his apartment, and when I arrived, I found him sitting on his living room floor with his back against the couch, staring into space. There were boxes around, Brooke's things that she'd packed before leaving. His apartment that used to feel like a home now seemed like an empty shell. I sat with him on the floor and we didn't say anything for a long time. We were just there. And eventually he started crying. Like really crying. Not just silent tears, but sobs that shook his whole body. And I was crying too, because seeing my brother like that, so broken, so destroyed, was unbearable. He asked me how it was possible that Eric had done this to him. How his own brother, the one who had always preached about family loyalty, the one who always said family came first, had betrayed that trust in the most horrible way possible. When my parents found out, it was absolute chaos. Owen had to tell them, because it was impossible to hide that the wedding had been canceled and that Brooke had left. My dad got furious, like more furious than I'd ever seen him in my entire life. He started yelling that he was going to kill Eric. How dare he do that to his brother? That it was an unforgivable betrayal. My mom cried and tried to calm him down, but she was also in shock. She couldn't believe that her oldest son, her favorite, had done something like that. Isabel found out when we were all at my parents' house, and her reaction was pure cold fury. She didn't yell or cry. She just said that Eric was dead to her, that she never wanted to see him or talk to him again in her life. The family divided right there, in that moment. My dad, Isabel, Owen and I on one side, and my mom trying to stand in the middle, even though she was clearly devastated by what Eric had done. My dad tried calling Eric, left like 20 messages telling him to show up, to talk, to show his face, but Eric didn't respond. Eventually, my dad went to Eric's loft and had a confrontation that, from what I heard later, ended with my dad basically disowning Eric, telling him he was no longer his son, that he'd broken something that could never be repaired, that family had always been the most important thing and he'd destroyed it for a woman. Eric supposedly tried to explain himself, said it hadn't been his intention, that he'd simply fallen in love and couldn't control his feelings. But my dad didn't want to hear any of it. Told him it was a pathetic excuse and that he never wanted to see him again. My mom, on the other hand, although she was hurt and disappointed, couldn't simply cut Eric out of her life. He was still her son, and that caused a lot of tension between my parents, because my dad felt that my mom was betraying Owen by not taking a harder stance against Eric. Brooke officially moved in with Eric like 2 weeks after the confession, and they started living together in Eric's loft as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't destroyed an entire family. My mom would go visit them, which made us all angry, but she said Eric was still her son and she wasn't going to abandon him no matter what he'd done. I understand it's difficult for a mother, I guess, but it felt like another betrayal. Like, how can you go have coffee with the son who did that to your other son? Owen tried to be understanding with my mom, but you could see on his face that it hurt, that he felt like my mom was choosing Eric over him. Isabel was much more direct. She told my mom that if she kept maintaining contact with Eric, then she would also distance herself from her. And my mom cried but kept visiting Eric anyway. The following months were the worst of my life, and it wasn't even happening directly to me. Owen sank into a horrible depression. He stopped going to social events, barely left his apartment except to go to work, lost like 15 pounds because he hardly ate. I tried to be there for him as much as I could. I'd go to his apartment, bring him food, we'd sit and watch movies or just be in silence because sometimes that was all he could handle. Isabel also supported him, but she was so angry that sometimes her anger made things harder, like she'd say things like, Eric and Brooke are going to get what they deserve. Karma exists. And although she was probably right, it wasn't what Owen needed to hear at that moment. My dad tried to be strong for Owen, but I knew he was also devastated. The family he'd built so carefully had crumbled and there was nothing he could do to fix it. My mom tried to organize family gatherings and insisted that we should all try to get over it, that Eric had made a mistake, but he was still family, that time would heal the wounds. But none of us wanted to hear that. It was too soon. Too fresh. Too painful. The only family dinners that kept happening were without Eric, and my mom would come, but she looked sad and divided, like she was betraying someone no matter where she was. One day my dad told her she had to choose, that she couldn't keep playing both sides. And my mom started crying, saying it wasn't fair to ask her to choose between her children, and my dad told her that Eric had made his choice when he decided to betray his brother. And so they kept fighting. It was exhausting for everyone. Then, like 6 months after all, the initial drama, Eric and Brooke got engaged. My mom was the one who gave us the news, Like she came to one of our sad and depressing dinners and said she had something to tell us, that Eric and Brooke were getting married. The silence that followed was deafening. Nobody knew what to say. Owen got up from the table and left without saying a word. Isabel said something like, "Of course they are. They're perfect for each other. Both traitors." And my dad told my mom he didn't want to hear about Eric in that house again. That if she wanted to keep seeing him, it was her decision, but not to mention him in front of him. I just sat there feeling this mix of disbelief and disgust. Like, how could they get married so quickly after destroying Owen? Didn't they have even a shred of shame or remorse? They got married like 3 months after the engagement, a small wedding that only my mom attended from the whole family. My mom invited all of us, obviously, but we all flatly refused. Isabel told my mom that if she went to the wedding, she wouldn't talk to her for a month. And even though my mom went anyway, the month of silence afterward was brutal. Owen didn't say anything about the wedding. He simply acted as if it hadn't happened, as if Eric didn't exist. And I think that was his way of surviving. Just erasing Eric from his mind and his life. On the day of the wedding, I stayed with Owen. We had some beers and watched mindless action movies, trying to distract ourselves from the fact that our brother was marrying our other brother's ex-fiancée. It was surreal. Completely fucked up. After the wedding, things calmed down a bit. Not because we were better, but because we simply got used to the new normal. Owen started rebuilding his life slowly. He got a new apartment because the previous one had too many memories of Brooke. Started therapy that really helped him. And little by little, he went back to being something similar to how he was before, though never exactly the same, you know? Something in him had changed permanently. He'd lost a certain innocence or trust in people that he'd never fully recover. Isabel got a job in another city and moved, not just for work, but because she needed distance from the whole family situation, and although we missed her, we all understood her need to get away. Family gatherings became weird and tense. It was just my mom, my dad, Owen, and me, and there was always this topic we didn't talk about, but that was there, present in every awkward silence. My mom kept seeing Eric and Brooke regularly. She'd go to their apartment or meet them for lunch, and although she no longer told us the details, we knew she maintained contact with them. Eventually, she started subtly pushing for us to consider forgiving Eric, saying things like, "Life is short, family is important, everyone makes mistakes." But every time she mentioned it, the rest of us tensed up. Nobody wanted to talk about it. It was like touching an open wound that had never fully healed. My dad would tell her to drop the subject, that we decided whether to forgive or not, and she couldn't force it. But my mom kept insisting because deep down, I think she wanted her family united again. She wanted things to go back to how they were before, but that was impossible. What Eric had done had changed everything permanently. And then, like a year and a half after they got married, something happened that none of us saw coming, although maybe we should have anticipated it. My mom showed up one day at my apartment, crying, and told me that Brooke had cheated on Eric. Apparently, Eric had discovered messages on Brooke's phone, the same story Owen had lived through, and Brooke had confessed that she'd been seeing someone else, that she wasn't happy in her marriage, that she felt Eric was controlling and jealous and she needed space. Eric was devastated, according to my mom, completely destroyed, and she was trying to console him but was also in shock because how could Brooke do that to Eric after everything they'd gone through to be together? The irony was so perfect, it was almost comical, like karma had come to collect with interest. My first reaction was to laugh. I admit it. It wasn't my most compassionate moment, but it was just too perfect. Too poetically. Just somehow. I asked my mom why she was telling me this, and she said that Eric was asking about Owen, that he wanted to talk to him, that now he understood the pain he'd caused and wanted to apologize. I told my mom that was ridiculous, that Owen had suffered for years because of what Eric did to him, and now that Eric was suffering the same thing, he suddenly wanted to reconcile. I told her it wasn't fair to Owen, that he was finally starting to heal and bringing Eric back into his life would only reopen old wounds. But my mom kept insisting, saying that everyone deserved a second chance, that Eric had learned his lesson the hardest way possible. I called Owen to tell him. I thought he had a mantra, right to know. And his reaction was nothing. Literally nothing. He was silent for a moment and then just said, "Well, I guess now he knows how it feels." And that was it. There was no satisfaction in his voice, no joy at the karma, just this tired resignation, like he didn't even have the energy to feel vindication anymore. I asked him if he'd consider talking to Eric, and he told me no. That what happened between Eric and Brooke didn't change what Eric had done to him, that the fact that Eric now understood the pain didn't erase the original betrayal. And he was right. Completely right. Isabel had the same reaction when I told her. She said something like, "Too bad for Eric, I guess, but that doesn't make him any less guilty of what he did. Pain doesn't absolve you of your sins." My mom organized like a family intervention. She asked all of us to come to her house because she needed to talk to us about something important. When we arrived, she was there with my dad, and she sat us all down in the living room and started talking about Eric, about how he was suffering, about how Brooke had left him and he was alone and remorseful and needed his family. She said enough time had passed, that we needed to forgive and move on, that holding this grudge was only hurting ourselves. My dad interrupted her and told her to speak for herself, that he hadn't forgiven Eric and had no intention of doing so, that what Eric had done was unforgivable, and the fact that he was now suffering the consequences of his actions didn't change that. Owen spoke next, calm but firm, and said he understood that my mom wanted her family united, but that wasn't going to happen. That he'd made peace with what Eric did to him, but that didn't mean he wanted to have a relationship with him, that he'd moved on with his life and Eric wasn't part of it. Isabel was more direct. She said Eric had made his bed and now he had to lie in it, that she felt no obligation to support him now that he was going through the same thing he put Owen through. I agreed with my siblings. I told my mom I understood her position as a mother, but she couldn't force us to forgive something that still hurt us. That forgiveness didn't work that way. My mom cried and said we were becoming hard and resentful people, and my dad told her no. We were just establishing healthy boundaries and protecting our mental health. That was basically the last time we talked about Eric as a family. My mom kept seeing him, obviously, but she stopped trying to force the reconciliation after seeing that none of us were going to give in. Eric and Brooke officially divorced like 6 months later. The whole process was quick and drama-free because they had no children or complicated shared properties. From what I understand, Eric moved on with his life. I guess he learned something from the whole experience, although honestly, I don't care enough to find out. Owen is fine now. In fact, he's dating someone new, a girl he met at work, and he looks genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen since before. Brooke Isabel still lives in another city, but we talk often, and she comes to visit every so often. My dad has never mentioned Eric since that last conversation. It's like Eric stopped existing for him. The other night we were at a family dinner, just the usual people, my mom, my dad, Owen, and me because Isabel couldn't come. And someone mentioned something about family loyalty, and there was a moment of awkward silence because we all thought about Eric, even though nobody said his name. My mom looked sad, probably thinking about how we all used to be together, and my dad took her hand in a gesture of silent comfort. Owen changed the subject asking about my dad's work, and we continued with dinner as if nothing had happened. But we all knew there was this ghost at the table with us. This permanent reminder that the family we had no longer exists and will never exist in the same way again. And honestly, I've gotten used to it. To this new version of our family. Smaller, more cautious, but maybe stronger in a certain sense because those of us who remain really choose to be there for each other.